we've got people coming in, the participants now, so everybody's streaming in from the lobby.
Ah.
We'll just wait till everybody are there that are waiting. Good evening, all. Welcome to our second in our winter webinars. We're very grateful for you joining us tonight. We do appreciate you giving your time. Hopefully everybody are tucked away comfortably at home, either having your dinner or prepping for dinner. But with the screens off, you can sit at your leisure listening to us go on. So yeah, welcome. We're delighted this evening to have one of our breeding partners, Matt Harding, who some of you will know well, and the Harding family, and also Will Oliver, who I'm sure most of you on the arable side will also know. So two great individuals that have a story to tell. This evening, we're going to really let them talk, describe to us their businesses, how they're working together. And I suppose from there, we will then explore what opportunities are out there for us. In this world we live in these days of regen and soil health and all the facets that go with that. So we're going to start. What we will do is we are recording the call so that people that have registered this evening, and we've got best part of 180 people that have registered for this evening's session. So a recording will go out to everybody afterwards. So that's why we're recording. There will be a Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. So please, if you've got questions, feel free to tap those questions into those there. We will make our very, very best to make sure we get them all. We won't disrupt the flow of the speakers. We'll let them do their piece, and we will then come back in with questions at the end. But there'll be plenty of opportunity for us all to find out more about the elements that we want to. So without further ado, we're going to pass over to Matt Harding over in Nuneaton. So over to you, Matt. Welcome.
Thanks, Dewi. I'll share the screen. Hopefully that's up and running. Yep, very good. Thank you, Dewi. Evening, everyone. I don't know what's more intimidating, the fact that Dewi just said that there's might be 160 people registered to watch this, or knowing that one of them is my dad. So if I get anything wrong, hopefully Dewi will pick it up in the comments as they come through. All I'm going to do is describe a little bit. I've got a few slides that sort of describe a little bit about who I am, our farm business, and how it changed a little bit. And that change that we did sort of led us to working with Will and how that's sort of worked as we've gone forward, really. So to start with, just a little bit about, if the slides will move on, which they will, really quickly, a little bit about me. We're based in the centre of England, so on the Leicestershire-Warwickshire border. There's a little stone in the local village that says the centre of England, because I think we're about as far away from the sea as you can possibly get. I was born on this farm where we are now, and I think I'm the fourth Harding to have farmed here. So yeah, it's sort of in our blood a little bit. Having said that, I spent most of my childhood believing I was going to be a professional footballer, although I wasn't actually that good, and it was made quite obvious to me at one point that the best I could ever be was a fairly average PE teacher. So with that in mind, I changed direction and decided I'd best get an education in agriculture, which was my other passion, and so I went off to Harper Adams. Ironically, I spent most of my time at Harper Adams playing football, but I did get a degree as well. And the best thing about Harper was that I did a placement year in a pig company with PIC, and that led to my first job after I left Harper Adams. So I joined PIC, which the Pig Improvement Company, which would be one of the largest pig genetics companies in the UK and globally, really, selling gilts, bulls, but predominantly semen. And while I was there, they were actually bought out or merged with Genus on the dairy side. So together would be one of the biggest livestock genetics companies in the world. So for a little sheep farmer from Leicestershire, it was quite an amazing experience to be part of such a big company with such a big research budget and that were pushing the boundaries of genetic improvement so much. And I absolutely loved being with them for about 5 years. Unfortunately, I just really didn't like pigs. And so when a very persuasive Welshman, who's actually on this call at the moment, told me that he was setting up an even bigger company that's going to be focused on sheep breeding, Dowie convinced me to join Innovis. And I spent about 8 years working with Innovis as well as a part-time back at the family business before me and Ellie had our two daughters, Olive and Meg, and I was advised that I needed to be at home a bit more. And so I came back to the home full time. What home is a relatively small ring-fenced farm. We're kind of surrounded by arable farms, Will being one of those. But we're a 180 acre sheep and beef farm, basically. Traditionally, it would have been a mixed rotation with arable as well. But when our gateways got too small for combines and the ram business grew, we decided to put it all into grass. And so it is a completely grass farm now. We'd have some permanent pasture and then the majority of it would be in a 5 to 6 year reseeding rotation, putting herbal lays back in. And then we rent about 50 acres of other permanent pasture. And then we'll talk a bit later about our wintering options as well, to sort of give us extra land going to keep the business as big as we can, really. The beef is a very small operation. We just buy in stores in the summer that act as a grazing tool, and then we sell them as strong stores before Christmas, so nothing's housed over winter. The main enterprise on the farm is something that was started long before I was involved, which is Bentley Suffolk. So it's a pedigree Suffolk sheep flock breeding rams, and that was started by my granddad and dad back in 1960, and for many, many years was a very successful business, probably leading until I was born, really. And they were able to be very successful in the show ring at many royal shows, but as well as able to sell and have a very sustainable business selling commercial rams into the commercial industry. And at that time, we're able to really do the same thing with the same sheep. A very good commercial sheep was doing well in the pedigree show world and vice versa. But they were also both very open-minded, and I think that's kind of hopefully rubbed off on me. And it was one of the things that really attracted me to genetics and genetic improvement was Dad and Grandad would have been some of the first people to performance record Suffolk sheep in the UK, some of the first to use CT scanning to get full body analysis, and also Dad was one of the first people to utilize New Zealand genetics, Suffolk genetics in the UK as well. So always looking at ways to improve, which is what got me hooked a little bit, really. But the system that was run on would be what I would describe as a traditional pedigree ram breeding system. So we were lambing early, we were lambing in January, and we were creep feeding those lambs as much as we could in reality to get them fit and ready for sale in July and August that same year. And we would be selling a lot of those at auction marts and NSA events that would have us penned next to somebody else, and you obviously had to compete with the sheep next door. So we needed big, powerful rams, and therefore feeding was a big part of the system, really. The picture in the top right isn't our sheep. It's just that I've burnt all evidence that we ever fed sheep, so I had to find that on Google. So I don't think we've got any little Berrichons kicking about. So yeah, fundamentally that was the system. But we realised probably around the same sort of time that I was at PIC moving to Innovis, sort of in that early 2000s, 2010 time, that we were probably going to have to change because there were quite a few reasons for that. But the main reason that we were going to change the system was economics. We started to lose customers. Dad and Grandad had built up a big following from the farm, but gradually we were seeing less and less rams being sold, and the the sort of enthusiasm for Suffolks at the markets was less as well. And a big reason for that was ram longevity. It seemed to be, speaking to people, that was an issue, and also vigor and ease of lambing at birth as well on a commercial farm. Continental rams, Charolais and Texels had really come in at this point and were very popular, and also composites were also starting to come on the scene. And I think also the Suffolks were moving in a different direction. So no longer were you able to hit the show and the commercial market with the same sheep. We were sort of happily sat in between those markets, neither achieving either, basically. We didn't have anything with long enough ears or big enough legs to win a show, and commercially, yeah, there were better options out there as well. So we realized we were going to have to do something if we were going to keep the business going. As I said, I was at PIC, or around that time I was at PIC, and one of the fundamental things that changed, which probably sounds quite obvious, and it certainly, or I always think it sounds obvious when I say it out loud, was my role at PIC was on commercial farms. So someone would have bought PIC genetics, and then it was my role to go on the farm and try and get the best performance for them on their farm with the PIC genetics. So the boar was completely irrelevant. Nobody even talked about that. It was just how well was that genetics actually performing on that commercial unit. Whereas I'd grown up on a sheep farm breeding rams where what we were trying to do was breed the best ram possible at the point of sale. And so that, although small difference, was quite fundamental to what changing my approach and our approach in terms of how we were going to breed rams going forward. And that linked really well with the Innovis philosophy and Dowie and his view. And it was about the same time I joined Innovis that kind of all clicked together. Breeding sheep in basically a commercial system, trying to select genetics that would then go and perform in a commercial situation. So that experience at Innovis had a big impact. And also while I was there, we developed along with David Rossiter and Rich Rossiter down in the Southwest, and obviously the Innovis team, the Arbor Black, which is a Suffolk-based composite with Innovis. And we developed that with our base Suffolk genetics. So that, as well as the system that we were seeing Innovis breed sheep on, had a big impact, and we realized we were going to have to change what we were doing on all fronts back at the farm, basically. So what that new system looked like was really straightforward. We basically just moved it to a normal commercial system in our area. We pushed lambing back, so we now lamb in March and April. We lamb the Suffolks in March and the Aber Blacks and Aber Fields in April, just from we lamb inside, so from a shed space point of view, that seems to work for us. We put a lot more focus now on a lambing ease and lamb vigor. A huge selection pressure on that, both in recording to go into EBVs, but also from a culling perspective as well. And then udder shape and teats, etc. We sell a lot of Suffolk rams in particular to produce Suffolk cross females. So not only for our own benefit, but we feel that has a big impact going forward. We don't feel we feed concentrates to the ewes in the lead up to lambing because we lamb inside, but as soon as we turn those ewes out to grass, we don't feed any concentrates after that point, and we don't feed anything to the lambs. So they're on a complete grass rotation and then measured and recorded on that grass system. And we've increased culling at all levels of the flock. That wasn't always sort of on purpose. The first few years that we moved that Suffolk flock in particular onto a grass system, we lost a lot of sheep out of the system. Some that we thought would handle the change that just simply didn't. So just couldn't hold condition and couldn't perform without that concentrate support. So there was a lot of culling at that stage, and then moving forward now, where I think we've got quite a solid base of stud ewes. We've got a high culling focus on foot problems, dirty back ends, lambing problems, that sort of thing. All the things that our commercial customers focus on, we try and focus on heavily in that point of view. And now we've got that sort of stud flock up and running, that gives us more chance to put a lot more focus on our EBVs. And that's one of the great things about being sort of involved with Innovis is their focus on genetic improvement, and you can't really stand still. If you ever kind of think you've made it, then the following year you slide down the table a little bit. So you've kind of got to keep pushing the genetics and those EBVs forward, which I really enjoy. And the other great thing about being involved with Innovis is that there's a lot of very clever people in their team that send me some fancy graphs that make my presentation look a little bit better. So Janet sent these through today, basically just showing that, yeah, since we started the Alba Black, which would have been back just before 2015, through the work of them and our selection, really, we're able to improve the terminal traits, which you can see in the top corner there, the growth and muscling, but really importantly, at the same time, improve lambing traits, survival, ease, and lamb vigor as well. So just backing up that hopefully, yeah, that selection pressure and the changing system has sort of worked, and we're achieving that. Just to add the balance, we pulling the same information really from Signet that we record the suffix with. We've managed to do in a similar time frame, again, a nice increase in terminal traits, but as well, we've improved our lambing traits as well. That lambing ease graph on the left-hand side is quite pleasing from our perspective that our suffix are improving from that point of view as well. But one of the key things that changed with the changing system was how we sold our rams. Instead of being able to sell them as ram lambs, we were now lambing later, not feeding any concentrate. So inevitably, we were going to end up running them round and selling them as shearlings. I think that works a lot better for the people that are buying the rams, but it obviously gives us a little bit of a headache of what we're going to do with them over winter. So wintering became a far bigger sort of issue for us. We'd got more sheep numbers. We'd introduced the Alba Black stud flock as well now, and obviously we've got these ram lambs running around for sale next year. And we've tried different things, and what we found generally is that ewes are pretty adaptable. So whether that's on really good forage crops or whether it's on a sacrifice field with silage, we can kind of handle the ewes through the winter. They're quite similar with the ewe lambs because we run them dry. We can lean on them pretty hard. But if we're going to grow the rams on through to and get them fit and strong rams going onto a grass rotation ready for sale, they really need to be on some quality feed through the winter. And that's where the arable farms have been a real key to the business since we've come in. We've had different crops, and we started when we first started wintering, we were very much on a turnip or a turnip mix, turnip and kale mix. And to be honest, when we started, this would be 2015, 16, we were getting some really good crops with that, and we had some real success. But there was a couple of things that were real key to that, and a huge part of that was sowing date, and we were in a system where we were following winter barley, and that so we were getting them. The turnips were going in sort of mid to late August, and we were getting a really good crop to then graze through the winter. I don't know whether it's just my knowledge, but winter barley doesn't seem to be in as many rotations anymore. Will would know better than me, but we ended up following wheat towards the end of the turnips, and yeah, you'd be going in September and having quite a poor crop, and also we'd end up moving around someone's ground and ended up on some. It worked really well on light free draining land, but there's a lot of kind of heavy clays in our part of the world as well, and they weren't quite as much fun to be grazing turnips on. We are actually for the first time for a while we're grazing turnips this year, and this is a block we've got, and that we've not had we've had quite a kind winter in a lot of ways, but you can still see strip grazing, not overly stocking. We're still leaving a little bit of poaching behind, so that is inevitably what happens when we're grazing turnips. So as the turnip option sort of disappeared, luckily Will got in touch and he was looking at doing something different as well, and this was driven very much from Will and what he was trying to achieve with the ground. But Will put in forage rye and vetch. This was following wheat, so it was going in a bit later than the turnips, but we were still getting some really good covers by the end of November, early December. And obviously we didn't have issues like flea beetle, I suppose, which was hurting a lot of the turnip crops. But we now graze it in a different way. So rather than strip grazing, we're grazing it in blocks and back fencing it. This is helping from a soil point of view, I guess, but it's also the great thing about the rye from our perspective is that we're getting a second graze. So if we can manage it right and we don't take it off too hard, by the time we get back round to February, then generally in February, think day length gets a bit longer and we can really start to see that rye kicking on again. These pictures are from one of your fields, one of your blocks, Will, in, I think it was 2023. Last year would have been a bit wet. Most of it was underwater, but yeah, this was February. I think I took it and we pretty much bared it off before we were moving them on. But as you can see, by 3 weeks later, we could actually go back around it again. And from a ram growing point of view, February, March time is when the rams actually grow. So if we've got some feed absolutely kicking on at that point, it's great for us. And also, if we have too much ahead of us, then we've got the ewes and dry ewe lambs that can come in as well. So it's really started to fit this. It really fits our system really nicely. Just because it's a comparison this year, for the first time, we are grazing both turnips and the rye. If in some aspects we're carrying more rams and they're getting more grazing days per acre out of the turnips. However, they were sown 3 weeks earlier, and I don't think if we'd sown the turnips at the same time, that'd have been quite as equivalent. But also, we're going to regraze that rye, so those rams are going to come back round there and have another graze. So we are covering more area on the rye system, but the stock performance is better, and it seems to work. It works really well for us. So yeah, we're very pleased in that situation. Just sort of in summary of us and a little bit of experience we've had working with an arable system, and this very much applies with our relationship with Will. I think communication from the start is absolutely key to make it work. Understanding what everybody is aiming to get out of it and what they don't want to happen is really good and really important. Flexibility is also really important, and I know that's a lot easier when I'm talking about our relatively small numbers. And if you've got 2,000 ewes on cover crops, it's not quite as easy just to move them off when it gets a bit wet. But I think having the ability to take them off and put them on somewhere else, we sacrifice field with some silage if it does come very wet like we had last year, then you've got to understand your place in the system. Will's, as he will explain, is doing a variety of things to try and improve the soils, and the sheep hopefully are one of them. But we can quite easily undo that positive influence if we manage it wrong. And we're a very small part of Will's bigger picture. So I think understanding and knowing your place is quite a key thing to making it work as well. Yeah, and that's everything I've got to say, really. Stop share. There we go.
Thank you, Matt. That's really, really useful. I have seen one hand go up while Matt was talking, but unfortunately we can't bring you in verbally, but please put your questions in the Q&As if you have one, and we will definitely pick it up. I have to say it's been a pleasure coming on this journey with Matt. We knew he was a phenomenal asset when he was with PIC, and PIC did a great job in training Matt in terms of having that bigger vision. So having that skill set come into the sheep sector was vital. And obviously then Matt going home to farm with Charles and the family was an even greater opportunity for us to actually put that into practice in developing David Black, which they've done very, very successfully. And they've also brought their Suffolk flock into the modern era as one of the really fit for purpose, forage-based Suffolks in the UK, I would say. So yeah, it's been a pleasure. And actually quite an easy journey because he's not afraid of culling sheep or selecting the right sheep. So, but we'll come back to that afterwards, I'm sure. We're going to move over to Will, if that's all right, and ask Will to tell us a bit about his business, and then we'll come back to both afterwards. Over to you, Will.
Okay, I'm just going to try and share my screen. See what happens. Right, can you see that?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Will Oliver, and I farm very close to Matt, who you've just been hearing from on the Leicestershire-Warwickshire border. So, just going to go a bit about me. Like Matt, went to Harper Adams. Probably didn't do as well. I had quite a good time. Enjoyed placement too. Went to New Zealand for a few months. Probably didn't learn as much as Harper than I should have done. But what I would say is you make contacts, friends for life, and it's definitely well worth doing. And the placement year is invaluable because coming back to a family farm, you realise how you want to be treated as a member of staff, and I think that's very important. And yeah, when I came home, that's when I really probably wanted to start learning and actually realise that this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life, and we need to kick on and make changes. So I made the decision to do my basis and facts, and shortly after took on the farm agronomy. So at this point, we're farming about 2,000 acres, predominantly arable. We've got a bit of permanent pasture, and the rotation when I came back was a very high input, high output wheat or seed rate rotation, which many of the arable farms were in the area. And I'll go on to that in more detail further on in the presentation, but I wanted to make changes to the business, and I felt that putting myself doing courses, learning, it gave me the confidence to back myself and getting the knowledge. And then since then, I've gone on to be an appointee on the National Crops Board for my work with organic manures, and then vice chairman of the Midlands Crops Board, vice chairman of the Maize Growers Association. So yeah, I'm really passionate about learning and bringing those learnings back to the farm business. So when I came home, like I said, we were high input, high output, using a lot of bagged fertilizer, nitram, MOP, TSP, ammonium sulfate, and it just didn't really sit right. My grandfather and father came out the beef job in a big way when subsidies changed in the early 2000s. We turned all the sheds to commercial lettings, which was the right thing to do. But 10, 15 years of farming with bagged fertilizers was having a huge impact on our soils. It was clear to see. And we literally sat around the kitchen table. It wasn't on the back of a fag packet because none of us smoked, but did a back of the fag packet calculation. And in 2019, we opened our broiler enterprise, which then bought us nearly 2,000 tonnes of manure a year. And that sort of revolutionised the rotation, really. It meant we've got this tool in our armoury, but I really wanted to get the best out of it. So we started really getting down into testing our soils, testing the manures, getting into the knowledge of what our crops require. And it made me realise I want to utilise this manure, this asset that we've now got in the spring. So that didn't really suit the wheat rate rotation. And rape, I'm not being funny, it was pretty abysmal. We were having issues with flea beetle, uric acid, pigeons, slugs, and you just found yourself walking fields every day. Well, we still walk fields every day and field down, but we used to walk fields every day and field down about it. And I got fed up with it. It wasn't really earning much. We were getting 2 tonnes to the hectare, and really we wanted to be getting 4 at least. So we've not rape on the head, and I started to think how we're going to utilise these manures, and that led us down the route of altering our rotation drastically. So going from wheat, rape, and second wheats, we used to have second wheats as well. I knocked second wheats on the head, and then I said, right, we've got roughly 2,000 acres. We're going to have 1,000 acres of wheat. We're going to have 1,000 acres of break crops, and those break crops are going to be shared roughly evenly between winter beans and grain maize. And grain maize is a bit risky, but I like risk a little bit. So that led me to think, right, we've got this spring crop now. I can utilise the manures, but what else can we be doing? And that led us to having the conversation with Matt. This was pre SFI as well, and before we weren't getting any subsidies. We were doing this because we wanted to do it, and we looked at different mixes. And I personally like Ryan Vetch. I mean, we talk about it every year. and we're more than happy to try different things. But I feel it doesn't beat me, it doesn't grow against me. If there's a time when when Matt says the sheep come off and it's 3 weeks later it's growing again, I don't want to end up with this huge mass of leaf on the top, because it can really catch us out. So I do like the Ryan vetch. It works really well. It can be slow getting going. Like this time of year, you can look at the fields and you think they're a bit bare in places, but once he's grazed it that first time, it seems to really kick on that second time. So maize has suddenly become a huge part of our rotation, and I'd actually put it ahead of wheat now. So in 2023, our wheat cost of production was £60 a tonne, whereas our grain maize was £37 a tonne. So our gross margin on the maize was like 1,300, and that was about £100 more than our wheat. So I suddenly I actually prefer maizes. Wheat's still very important to us, but I have a huge passion about soil health. And although maize has a huge negative stigma about it, the way we're doing it actually is having huge benefits to our soils. We've got a market on our doorstep with GLW feeds, and also I'm selling it to Avara as well now. And what I really like is, like, you ring up, say I want to sell some maize, and they say a price, and then you think actually that's not quite enough, and they tend to come back and match what you're offering, because there aren't that many of us doing it. Whereas wheat, we seem to be getting absolutely hammering. But it's quite nice to have some negotiation with the sales of the products as well. I am also gone down the route direct drilling wheat after maize, and we are having reasonable success, but it does come with its challenges. So as I've touched on, a passion, obsession probably is nutrient use efficiency. It's hugely important, and that sort of came to life when COVID happened, and all the input prices skyrocketed. Well, it didn't really have as much of an impact on us. It just meant that we were more focused on what we were doing, utilising these manures. We do use digestate, sewage sludge, and poultry manure, which we've got. Moving away from digestate generally because the kit's too big, it's causing too much damage, and we were always being tempted to go too soon, because they would be there ready to go, and because our ground is drained and it does travel reasonably well because of the system we're in now. I used to find that, oh yeah, we'll go on that, and we were doing a bit of damage really with the kit, and because I tended to want to get them on the fields before they went off to anyone else, because you never get them back again. But so tending just now to be on sewage sludge in front of maize, and then also poultry manure in front of maize as well in places, and then we're also utilising the poultry manure on the wheat in the spring as a top dress as well, and doing quite a few trials with boffin, and just trying to see if we can really hammer down getting the best out of these nutrients. And that's our cost of production has dropped dramatically. Our carbon footprint's dropping dramatically, all because we're utilising these manures. And the days of having a heap by the farmyard and just spreading it on the field by the house, those days are long gone. We're really knuckling down where we put this manure. We've got a weigh bridge at the poultry site, so we weigh all the muck out. Then we put the relative amount down to where it's needed to be at the site. So we're really hammering down where we put these nutrients and making sure it's in the best place. Just want to touch on collaboration really with Matt in particular. It's not something that is probably done very often from where we're from. Everyone seems to keep themselves to themselves. You're a family farm, you do things yourself. But I enjoy arable, that's what my passion is. I don't really want to be moving sheep all winter, but Matt seems to quite enjoy it, so it works quite well. He comes in, and he has really, I don't know much about sheep, but they do look very good, and it's nice to have good sheep on your fields, and we work really well together. I don't even feel like we work together, because he just gets on with it, and you don't hear much, and it works. Like he says, be open and upfront with each other. Yeah, there's going to be times when things fail. You might plant something and it's not brilliant, and we say, look, we've tried this. The weather's really caught us out. It's not come, and we try and help. We've got certain areas of permanent pasture, and Matt tends to utilise them as well, and I think they can get them out of a mess. We had 75 acres going for solar, and we'd grass that down. That really helped last year. because it was such a wet winter, and actually having that 75 acres of grass, I think, got him out of trouble. But yeah, be flexible, be honest and upfront, keep talking, and I'm sure we'll be doing this for years to come, and hopefully trying different things and trying to just improve things slightly. So yeah, here's just a picture of some of the wheat that we've direct drilled into maize, and we've done the same again this year. It does work well, but it's just some of the later stuff you just get caught out, and you spend all of December, January, February thinking, what the hell have I done? But it does tend to get there in the end. Just hoping we get a kind start to 2025. But yeah, I think that's it from me, really. Just want to say, I say it in most of my presentations, it's so important getting off farm. We do work and live in an isolated environment, and actually if you get out there, put yourself out there, out of your comfort zone, it's amazing what you can learn and who you can meet, and 9 times out of 10 you can always bring something back to the family farm. So yeah, thank you, and I'm sure we'll be doing some questions.
Thank you, Will. That's really useful to understand. And again, I suppose, Will, in terms of your nutrient planning, there's it's become crucial. And what's interesting, you started this journey well before SFIs, and now obviously it's part and parcel of people's. They're even getting paid to do it. So, what's your view on that whole development, Will, in terms of how government and how incentives are going in terms of encouraging, breaks and rotations, and how these herbal A's and swords work?
I think I've always been there to embrace SFI. As a family business, my granddad always said, you've got to farm the way the government want you to farm, and he ripped out all the hedges. My dad said, you've got to farm how the government want you to farm, and he planted them back again. So yeah, we tend to do follow the government system because it is essentially easy money. Yeah, we're doing things anyway, but a lot of the stuff SFI is we were already doing, so it's easy money really, and it is an important part of our business. I'm not saying we're huge like BPS with losing that. It's not the be all and end all, but it's a huge part of our business that we need to replace, and SFI has helped us do that in a big way. Yeah, so the ones that there's a lot of people that don't even entertain looking at it, and I'd say actually sit back, go home and have a read, because it's surprising what it can bring to your business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Will, in terms of the manure, obviously from the poultry enterprise, do you put a value of that back into the poultry enterprise, or do you just leave that as a component in the arable? Do you cost them separately or not?
Yeah, we do cost them separately, and I kind of have to when it comes to benchmarking, because it gets quite unfair otherwise. So generally we market it on what the value is. So poultry manure is around £13 a tonne. And then I also, although it's a fixed cost, the spreading of it, I tend to bring that in as a variable, because that's what it's costing me at the end of the day. So yeah, £15-16 a tonne, generally stick that on, just to help level up the benchmarking point of view, really.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just touch on a little bit about the solar park, because obviously Matt told me a while ago that was a godsend to be able to graze into those last year as a plan B when crops weren't quite where they wanted to be with the wet conditions. How has that come about, and what's your plan with all of that?
It's all part of our risk management strategy. I'm the first to say we're not for solar or anything like that, but just in this case, we had some backland that was difficult to access, and we got approached, and it's just a part of our risk management strategy. It's almost another enterprise. It's a 41-year lease, and although it's being built as we speak, that will still be there to graze from that going forward as another option.
Yeah. And did you get any difficulties in grazing that? Was it straightforward or not? Muted, Matt. Matt's muted on that one, sorry.
No, it is a slow growing grass. It's a specific grass that's for solar parks. So it wasn't brilliant to start off with, but just given the year, when you're sort of looking where you can go, and it's on quite light ground as well, it did help them out.
There wasn't actually, there's no actual solar panels on it last year, so it's just a site ready to go. So it worked brilliantly, to be honest. But it was incredibly dry, and there was a lot of clover in it, and it felt like the only dry place in the county, to be fair, last year. So it was it was needed. But yeah, it'll be interesting. They're currently building it, so once all the fences come down and we can see what's there, it will be interesting to see what we can graze out with the panels actually up.
Yeah,
It's a shame, it's a shame that they built it.
there does seem to be some quite clever solar developments, isn't there, where there is actually a way of actually lifting the panels to be able to get under them, which probably into some of these developments going forward probably quite cost prohibitive, but something I suppose we could look at in time as an industry.
Yeah, definitely.
So we have a few questions which will come through, but I've just got one off there from Nigel. So I think one for you there, Will, is how do your phosphate indices respond to the manures you're putting on? Because obviously phosphate is one of these wonderful nutrients that are in short supply on this earth, if nothing else. So how do they respond to them?
So because we're actually relatively low, our indices on phosphorus are around 2s and 3s. So I'm just monitoring them. I actually got a grant for a soil sampler because I'm using a lot of organic manures. So I've got a Wintec soil sampler, and I'll go around and I'll do not ridiculously intensive grid sampling, but I will be able to do annual samples now and check, because with things that are going on in Herefordshire with poultry, we've got to be in control of what we're doing and manage these nutrients properly, because it could come back to bite us. So yeah, and our organic matter levels, we're seeing huge increases. One field, 65-acre field, in 5 years has gone from 2.8 to over 6. And that's cover crops, sheep, poultry manure, maize. Because we're doing grey maize, that's putting huge amounts of trash. But yeah, I'm always conscious of our indices, and also working with the water companies. They're on the same page as well. They're doing independent testing, and they're not going to let us have sewage sludge if our indices are getting high.
Okay, no, that's great. And just sticking with the cropping for a minute, we've got a question there from David. What does it cost for the rye and veg cover crop, and what rate do you drill it in at, though?
So I actually go at a low rate at about 50 to 60 kilograms a hectare. It's costing me, I think it's about £40 a hectare in total. But this year we were doing it on wide row spacings because we had a horse sprinter 12 metre, but we've actually done it with Horizon DSX, which is 20 centimetres spacing rather than 30. And we definitely see better results, like across the board. So this time, half the cover crop was done with the Horizon, half was done with the sprinter, and they're worlds apart. Like Matt will agree, they're worlds apart. So that's why you try different things and you learn, and it might be completely different another year, but I'll probably do it all with the Horizon next year. The lads won't be happy because that's half the width, but we'll get over it.
On the same, we're stuck on the rye a little bit, Will, but there's a question here from George saying, do you get paid subsidy for planting the forage rye and the vetch as an overwintering crop? How do you find killing off the rye in the spring? Is it a struggle with volunteers? And I think you've already answered if the mix is better direct drilled after wheat or broadcasted into the crop. But those are your three questions there.
So £129 a hectare we get for the cover crop now, but that we got that for SFI 23, but we've been doing it, Matt, or I think we've been doing this for 5 years now, 4 or 5 years. So we were doing it anyway. So the £129 is a bonus. We see it as a bonus. I've not had any issues with rye because it's grazed hard enough, really, and then we do go through with glyphosate, then we spread the manures, and then we top down it, basically. And that's pretty much our only cultivation in our system. So also within SFI, after maize, I've gone in for no-till for 3 years, because after the maize, it'll be wheat, beans, wheat, and I'm prepared to direct drill those 3 crops. So maize is sort of our only really cultivation we're having in our rotation as a rule, and I see it as a nice reset. It's a spring crop. It gives us options to do any drainage and stuff beforehand, and yeah, it works well.
Good. We have an anonymous attendee that's asking a question which you don't have to answer, but asking what's the normal type of arrangement? Is the grazier paying to establish the cover crop, or is it the arable farmer? I know the answer, but obviously.
So I established the cover crop. Matt puts his sheep on it. He does it how he wants to do it. He fences it. If he needs water, which isn't very often, but if he does need water, he sorts water. I can't think of a time when I've had to ring him and say, "Oh, you've got to move your sheep." There might be a time when I ring him and say your sheep are out, but other than that, it's from my end. I'd say it's pretty stress free, really, which is good because I don't want to. So.
And Matt, from your end, in terms of that element, because you've always spoken very highly of your arrangement, how does it work your end with it all?
Yeah, when we were on the turnips, we were more involved with the establishment, or to be fair, we're sheep farmers, so we didn't actually do the work, but we were paying for the seed and different things, and then from our point of view, this works really well because we're paying for what we're grazing. If we've owned the crop in some way, or then I think that's where it gets a bit more. You're desperate to utilize every last bit, aren't you? And it starts to get a little bit of a challenge. So it works great from our perspective. We've got Will definitely sows plenty, so we've got a lot of space to go at, which works best, hopefully well for both of us. I think the first time you said you might put in 100 hectares, and I thought you said acres. So we were on different here, but the space and the scope is a real advantage. But I think it works. It's very clean. It's work to your own skill sets. Will can establish crops far better than I can even dream of it. So he does that, and then we worry about the sheep and getting them back in when he rings me.
Great. And Will, in terms of quantifying the benefit, obviously there's the utilization of the crop, but any idea what's happening to organic matters by having those golden hooves on there?
So we're definitely seeing an increase in organic matter. Well, I wouldn't say it's the sheep, but the sheep are certainly a part of it. So, like I said before, I'm conscious of these cover crops growing ahead of me, beating me, and like the sheep are doing, as far as I'm concerned, they're doing a good job. But I mean, there's nitrogen fixation we're getting from the vetch, that's bringing benefits. There's weed suppression, soil structure improvements, definitely seeing better soil structure, erosion control. We took some cuttings a few years ago off the top, and when nitrogen was at £1,000 a ton, we were getting about £140 worth of nitrogen in the surf, in the leaf of the vetch per hectare. And I know people say, well, that's there. A lot of that's coming from the soil. It's there anyway. But I'd rather it be there, held in the crop, than going down the drains. So yeah, increased organic matter, enhanced nutrient cycling. There's huge, like the list goes on and on of the benefits. Yeah. The main drawback that people might say is actually getting the sheep to the farm. Do they have their own sheep? Are they set up for it? I'm just fortunate we've got a neighbour we can work together with, and and actually it's quite nice doing something a bit different and working with other people. You can get, like, it's great working with your family, but it's nice just to speak to other people. And knowledge exchange as well is a valuable part of it.
And you said a very important element at the beginning, in terms of how you want to be treated, and obviously you work better with people that you like and respect and get on with, and I think this is a really good example of that with you two.
Yeah, age probably comes into it a bit as well. I don't know, we're similar aged.
Quite a bit older than you, Will.
Pardon?
I'm quite a bit older than you, Will.
Yeah, but yeah.
I'm now 40. I'm way older than you. But yes, it is true, and it's a nice situation with our families. Our dads are similar ages and granddads were similar ages, and it's sort of, it's a very nice situation how it's worked out. But yeah.
Just finishing off on the crop element before we move on to some difficult sheep questions for you, Matt. What's the typical pre-grazing yield? I suppose a range, kilograms dry matter for the rye, and also do you have any information on the dry matter percentage and the protein percentage? Probably not, I would imagine, although probably Matt would say that they do quite well on it, so it's probably quite high. But in terms of yields, would you know what the yields would be, well, roughly?
It's so variable. I was looking at more in terms of stock performance to put something together for this, but it's so the variation on the year and the grazing conditions is so drastic. So the year 2023 to 2024, the crops were there, but it's the weather conditions were so bad, and the conditions that they were grazing, it's sort of night and day what the comparison. The best year we had with rye versus the best year we had on turnips, the rams came off winter 15 kilos heavier on average, which was just a mind-blowing experience. They were, to be fair, they were on there for an extra nearly 3 weeks, to be fair. But yeah, in terms of stock performance, I haven't got a yield that we're going into. It's more like most sheep farmers, I guess, in a way. We try and hold off it as much as we can, but come November, we're running out of other options, and so we go onto it, and then we just try and graze it lightly that first time, because, like I say, that really where it comes into its own is sort of that February, early March time. So it's
And
trying
obviously, utilization will vary dramatically from one year to the next. So you might have so many tons there, but it will be used very differently.
Sometimes you'll have more. I don't know why, but sometimes the vetch comes better than the rye, and then you'll go to another block and the rye's come better than the vetch. Whether it separates in the tank, sometimes I'm not sure. But then also the beauty is because we're doing maize, Matt's got plenty of time to graze. He can go late March into early April if temperatures aren't there yet. So it's not like we're doing a spring barley and we want to be in early Feb or anything like that. So yeah, it works well, and I'd rather see cover crops fields with sheep on it than over winter ploughed and just brown.
Yeah, and it has to be a better environmental footprint, doesn't it? Less exposed soils, so it has to be.
Yeah.
Because you cringe when you see some of the poached up fields after turnips, and and it's also from a public perception point of view, which is quite important these days, because lots of people are driving and walking past us, and we're always under scrutiny.
Some of the footpath people have had a bit of a shock because the arable fields that have been arable fields for 30 years suddenly have sheep on, but it's puts them back in their place. But I'll let Matt deal with them.
I hope they've got leads for the doggies. That's all I can say. So you don't seem to have too many problems with dog worrying, do you, Matt?
No. I mean, I've got a colleague who I send out to talk to them. So I get Dad to spend most of the week just wandering around, and he sort of manages the relationship pretty well. But no, generally, people are pretty good. And I think, most people that you speak to are actually just quite pleasantly surprised to see some livestock. But they, like Will says, they get a bit of a shock that there's electric fence across where they thought they were able to walk. But communication key again.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a question there from George asking what the benefits of the vetch would be over, say, clover. Again, I'm not quite sure.
The clover, you can struggle to kill it off a bit. The vetch generally a hard frost and it's gone. So I tend to like that really, because if it just, like I say, it doesn't get away from me. Whereas clover, you can end up with it sitting there. I have trialled on a completely different situation. I've tried putting clover in the rows of the maize when the maize is about knee high, and that's something I'm looking into as well going forward. So clover will hopefully play a part.
Brilliant. Moving on slightly more to the woolies, Matt. We've got a question here in terms of when do you bring the ewes in before lambing? How early do you bring them in? And how do you deal with their nutrition right up to that lambing point in terms of ME protein? So in other words, how do you transition in and how do you deal with them really?
Yeah, so we kind of we split the flock into two. So we've got the Suffolks that are lambing in March, and this is mainly driven by shed space as much as anything. But the Suffolks will come in once we've grazed off the grazing platform at our home farm. So they came in about a week ago or 10 days ago, and they'll be on a a quality haylage, and then they'll move on to just to make the circle complete. We buy feed from GLW, and we'll balance that with the haylage, and they'll start that sort of 5 weeks pre-lambing. The abbas, the 8-pool lambers, will graze a variety of options through the winter. We've got different grass keep that we take, and potentially multiples might go on to some of the rye if we had a really good crop of the rye. And again, we will try and start them on getting ready for coming inside to lamb, even if they're really, at times, they come in for a very short period, by giving them, again, that same premium unit just in the lead up to lambing. And then it's a very good point about, especially the abbas, they turn straight out onto grass. And there is quite a significant diet change there because we don't feed them anything. Come April, really, in our part of the world, generally grass is pumping. So, probably if you would say that it's not ideal that they're having a change of diet at that time, almost peak lactation, but we buffer with some energy buckets or mineral blocks that are out with them, and we just seem to find that they perform well on it. So I don't see the advantage of trying to feed them out, to wean them back off it. We just basically turn them out and let them get on with it.
And Mark, I assume you don't bother with any metabolic profiles or anything pre-lambing because you don't really see pregnancy toxemia twin lamb or anything?
No, because especially like with the Suffolks, we're feeding for long enough that's probably not an issue. We got into a habit of bolusing with a coverall, sort of like a trace Agramin 24/7 plus copper 6 weeks before lambing. We've just doing some work with some forage analysis, looking at what we specifically need rather than giving that whole thing. So we're drenching a more tailored mineral drench pre-lambing, and they'll have a bucket that's a bit more sort of appropriate for what we need going out afterwards. But that's what we add into the system.
Great. Just following on a little bit later in the sheep year, I suppose, Cormac is asking what finishing system you're using for the lambs that you're not keeping for breeding, and also what your lambing interventions are with specifically the Innovis breeds. You can comment on the Suffolks as well, obviously, Matt.
Yeah. We've never touched a Suffolk. No, so lambing interventions are quite interesting. I think we're running somewhere between 5% and 7% was the last information I got from Janet on them. But I always find it really interesting that between, we're obviously hopefully picking all of our best stock rams, but if we use ram lambs that are obviously scoring at that point really high, what you find is most of that 5% comes from certain sires, so there's still quite a big sire impact, which I always find interesting. And then so really the blacks in particular are very easy lambing. The only I'd be nervous of lambing aber blacks outside simply because certainly shearlings, there's a showerley element to the breed, so they get the lambs out quite quickly, but they're not always the most maternal initially. So that would be the only slight caveat to that. In terms of finishing system, we've got the herbal lays that we put in work really well for us in the summer. And what we try and do is keep because we're going to record everything, they kind of work around in mobs, and we just keep screening off once we've done the full recording out of that system. We do, at a point, there'll be the tail end ram lambs that we do actually feed, just because we have to separate them out at that point, and we sort of switch the focus then to keeping the good forage in front of the ram lambs that are growing on to the following year. But ewe lambs, it will be just off that forage rotation, basically, that herbal lays.
And I think, Matt, you part answered it in terms of there is a question here of the reason behind not lambing outdoors in your part of the country in April, and equally there's another question of any particular reason you don't farm aber fields. So obviously,
Yeah.
I'll let you answer those elements.
Well, and again, that same persuasive Welshman rang me up once and said, "I don't suppose you've got space for some aber fields. I've got a problem." So we do actually have a small flock of aber fields, which is it's a small nucleus flock of MV accredited aber fields for potential export of high health, which fits into the Innovis system. It's driven very much from the maternal traits that are being recorded up at the nucleus farm and some of the other breeding partners that are on a bigger scale and pushing them a bit harder perhaps. But they fit well with us. In terms of lambing outside, we did when I worked for Innovis and drove around with an Innovis shirt on and told everyone they needed to lamb outside. I did think I needed to try it myself rather than do that. So we did lamb. There were like a Primaras and Highlanders outside, and got on great with that when they were almost like a commercial. As soon as we were starting to record all of the information that we needed for Innovis, we felt we were kitted up, we had sheds, and it kind of worked to have everything inside on the own system just from a recording point of view. And it also, although we're in a kind part of the world, March and April still are pretty. We're not the freest draining. We haven't got a lot of shelter. We're incredibly flat. Actually, it was lambing outside at that point isn't always perfect. So we felt risk wise and from an ease of management, actually lambing inside works well for us.
Just following on from that, we have got a question which I'll answer this end, Matt, saying that does lambing indoors not defeat lamb vigor figure or deflate lamb vigor figures for a ram that is then to be used on a commercial flock? And if it was only that, it probably would. I would say that the people that use the Aber Black specifically would be a range of farmers from indoor North Country mule systems all the way through to small hill ewes on the side of a hill, and we cater for all of that. What I would say, which Matt has alluded to, is that we also have a flock of Aber Blacks that are lambing outdoors in a nucleus in Hoik, and they are held very firm to the sword in terms of their ability to do it up there. So we make very, very clear that all the genetics that are used will have good connectivity between Matt's flock and the Rossiters and Kevin Stewart up in the borders and the nucleus all the way through. So we make a very conscious effort that rams are moved around and very well connected. So the genetic evaluations will have some real hard ram or lamb selection pressure put on them, and they'll be fed in. So when you get an EBV for lambing ease and vigor from a Matt flock, will have had information from those outdoor systems fed into them, systems quite often that are run using DNA parentage as opposed to doing lambing beat. So they really have to get on with it themselves. You still record though, Matt, don't you, in terms of vigor with your system?
Yeah, and I again, when we lambed outside, we found it was actually. I totally understand the situation. They're in a controlled environment and it's a lot easier, but we can actually record more information, I feel, on the specific lambs when they're born in terms of how easily they're born and their vigor and speed to suckle and stuff. And there's different ways of looking at it. There's no environmental impact on them. You could score a lamb down because it's dead, but you've had a horrendous night in terms of weather. So we are very hot on the lambing ease and lamb vigor scoring and culling on the back of it, even though we're on an indoor system.
But I think both approaches lend you to a situation where you get sheep that look after themselves and reduce the labour element. So that's certainly the purpose behind it anyway. We've got a question there from Peter, or a couple really. How do you deal with the dip if the lambs go 6 weeks later in terms of before they go to slaughter? But I suspect you don't. You will have a dip probably, will you? So more or less, how do you wean your lambs, and how do you take your lambs straight to market from that point? I think you've already told us, Matt, that you keep lambs for longer because of the data capture. But do you see that dip, I suppose, in that element?
Yeah, and I guess we do. One of the things that we did do, and again, this was more luck with most of my research things, they're usually luck, but a couple of years ago, because I was going around with Innovis and everybody had got the new thing that was sorting out their flocks, I tried everything. And so we did one mob, we had a variety of options left to treat the lambs at 8 weeks old, which included a bolus, a mineral drench, and a cobalt injection, and nothing. And I did a little trial, and on our system, we saw a significant impact of putting a lamb bolus, a selenium and iodine bolus, into the lambs at 8 weeks in terms of their weaning check. They were on average just over a kilo heavier than the other two mobs, the other options. So that's one thing we definitely do that helps. We find that the grazing on not having the grazing on a herbal lay with the ewe and lamb and then being weaned onto a herbal lay, the lambs really move onto a similar diet, and that seems to help as well from what we were doing. So yeah, those two things really.
And I suppose it's important to note, Matt, that you do feed budgets, you rotationally graze pretty much across your platform at home. So you've changed your complete mindset in how you deal with your grassland management and your grazing management as well, haven't you?
Exactly. Yeah. So again, Dowie paid me to sit in a car with Charlie Morgan for a long time. So I just had a very impressive course in grassland management, which was paid for by Dowie, which was quite nice. But yeah, we've tried to adapt and rotationally graze to maximize the production out of our relatively small grazing platform really.
And it still amazes me as an industry that pretty much everybody out there that is set stocked will increase their forage grazing capacity by 40% just by subdivision and rotationally grazing. That's a huge matrix in terms of your profitability. You know, quite often we say to people, stop running around the countryside taking on more land, but actually subdivide and nutrient manage what you've got. And you'll grow 40% more grass if you graze it properly. So, you know, for beef and sheep farmers out there, that's a huge low-hanging fruit that the people that convert into it, like Matt, they see that it's actually doable, Matt. And although initially you think, can that be possible? It actually is, isn't it? So I'm just going to deal with one worming question before we just go back to Will for a couple of questions to finish. And I suppose it takes us back to there's a question here in terms of how do you deal with worming in terms of doses per year, combating not worming too much, Matt. And obviously there's a component of that when they go on to Will's ground, because you know we get phenomenal performance when we graze some of these cover crops because there is no worm challenge. So just talk us a little bit through your worming policy and what happens on the arable element.
Yeah, so we will worm. I've got a good relationship with our vets, which do fecal egg counts for us as part of a package. So that drives quite a lot of it. We've got quite strong resistance to white wormers, but they still hit nematodirus pretty well. So that will be their first drench, and then following that, it will be based off fecal egg count. And the positive element to the level of recording that we're doing now is that everything runs over a combi clamp with a weigh cell and is recorded when we're doing anything. So even if we worm a mob, we'll only worm sheep that are not performing. So even if the FECs are high, if lambs are still growing over a certain rate, whether they're doing over 300 grams or whatever it is at different times, we'll set a sort of benchmark, then we'll leave them undrenched. And we generally sort of rotate. So we'll go white, clear, yellow, and that should really get us through to the point where we go off to the for the wintering onto Will's crops, and then we'll give them a Zolvix or a StarTect before they go, so we sort of clear them out, and then they can have a free winter. And then we'll just monitor in terms of the rams. Then coming back onto our system, we just simply monitor them. We don't do anything by routine, and quite often they don't have really much of a worm burden as coming back as fit, strong rams in the following year.
And we know from the science of it, don't we, that obviously there's less worm burden on those crops to begin with. and also the quality of the feed they're getting in terms of some of the protected tannins and stuff have a real important component in terms of immunity and worm resistance. So what I would urge people out there to do, if you're not doing it already, is whenever you drench a sheep, do a post-drench test, 10, 14 days, depending on the product. Speak to your vets, because it's really, really important to understand if your products are working, because you can be wasting a lot of time and a lot of product and also killing quite a lot of those valuable dung beetles in the process, which in turn impacts your soil health just by dosing ineffective products to resistant worms in your sheep. So actually doing that post-drench check is a really, really important tool, I think, as an industry, because it enables us then to make sure we only use the right stuff that works, and save ourselves a lot of cost and hassle at the same time. Moving back, I think, Will, you found some yields, I think, for us.
Yeah, so the question about dry matter, I didn't know off the top of my head, but yeah, we took about, last year we took about 10 cuttings, square metre each, fresh weight. So this is the rye and the vetch before it's been grazed. Fresh weight, 7.96 tonne a hectare. And then the dry matter was 14.8 tonne a hectare. So, and CN ratio, if anyone cares, 9.68. And then the nitrogen was 49 kilograms per hectare. So, and we'll continue to do this in future years as well, going forward.
And Will, that's quite a respectable yield, really, and analysis. How much variation would there be in that, do you think, one year to the next? Is that a particularly good set or not?
There is variation, and a lot of it's down to the year. When can we get the wheat off? As soon as we do sell our straw to livestock farmers in the area, so that can sometimes cause a delay. But generally, yeah, we want to get on as quick as we possibly can, really. So Matt can have the earlier stuff does do better generally.
Yeah. And just to reiterate again, I think what Will said in terms of why he likes this particular crop is that it doesn't give you a big surface cover. It doesn't get away on you. So it's a manageable crop when you're needing to go back in with that maize, which is really your important crop, isn't it, really? So,
yeah, I mean, people like neighbours, they'll do Phacelia and stuff like that, and it looks brilliant. And there's huge like leaf there, but I don't tend to want that as such. I mean, I'm happy to do the odd field if Matt's going to graze it hard enough, but generally, I think the rye vetch works well. So
yeah. There is one question on the rye vetch. In terms of broadcasting rye veg into a standing crop, is it prone to slugs or not, Will?
It's prone to slugs generally. So the horizon that we've got is a direct drill, and we've got an extra tank, so we can put slug pellets down. So we tend to put 1 kilo a hectare just as a protection point, and then if we want to go again later, we can. I would love to be able to broadcast it into the crop, but I find that we need that seed soil contact, really. We'd have to use a lot more seed, which is more cost. And then also we're on 36 metre tram line, so you wouldn't be able to spread it. So unless we get drones in, which again I would love to, like, if it could come to that, if you could broadcast it a few weeks before harvest or well before harvest, so it's up and away, that would benefit both of us, really. But it's just the practicalities of it, and is it really going to grow? And then there's contamination of the grain if you put in rye. There's lots of things to think about.
And I'm pretty sure if there is innovation that can help, then you're going to find it. So
we'll try it. Yeah, we'll try it.
Yeah. There is a question here, thinking back into the sheep. Will you be able to buy parasite-resistant rams in the near future? You can do now. On our maternal lines, we do have fecal egg counts. We do individual fecal egg counts on our maternal sheep. So you can get Aberfields Highlanders with FEC-resistant figures on them. And to explain how that's done, really, normally we do this as the lambs get into the autumn. You normally need lambs over 18 weeks of age before you can actually get a sensible reading from them. We allow their mob counts to increase, sometimes as high as 700-800 eggs per gram. And when the group counts, which we monitor sort of weekly, gets to that stage, we do individual fecal samples. In fact, we've just done 320 yesterday in the farm in Scotland. And we also take a blood sample from them and for serum to look for IgA, their immune response. So we're part of the Breed for Change project, where we're looking have that aspect of it, along with some performance recorded cleans and explainers. And Dorset. So we do have fecal egg count reduction figures, and if people want those specific type of sheep, that will reduce the amount of drenching that they need, especially in organic systems or regen systems, then speak to us and we can actually point you in the direction of those right sheep early on. It is something we've been talking about doing with Aber Black as well, Matt, isn't it? In terms of, we do find quite a lot of the Aber Blacks are being used for maternal crossing, where that Suffolk Cross ewe has been used historically, especially in that sort of Herefordshire Midlands area. So it is something we'll probably look to introduce, because Matt does have a burning interest in this area as well. So it is something we're working with, really. Hopefully that's answered that question for you. There's one question remaining currently in the box, which is if you prefer bolus or drenching. And again, I think the important element there, as Matt said, is that we have the ability these days to actually do soil analysis and forage analysis and work out what the trace element and nutrient statuses are, both in terms of what's in the soil and what the animals are actually getting. And then we can overlay that with some things like liver samples of cull ewes to actually get some proper handle on things. And we can tailor a bucket or a drench that's actually specifically giving you the mineral trace elements that are needed for that farm. So it's sort of an involvement, something we've been involved with now with Chris Williams in CNS for a few years, who is also involved with Mac currently. So it's something, again, trying to have a bit more precision and a targeted approach, as opposed to using the sort of bog standard off the shelf. And we're seeing that we're getting quite good results with it so far in terms of understanding what blockers, antagonists are happening on farm, and actually making products that are specific to it, so we're not really using stuff that's not needed. But as always, you've got to monitor then what's happening in the animal. And I'm sure if you work with your vets, they'll tell you that some trace elements and minerals can be looked at through blood, things like cobalt, but quite often when you go to things like copper, you've got to go into liver biopsies or liver analysis of cull ewes. But again, like everything else, if you can actually hone in on those elements that make the difference to your flock, you'll end up spending less money long term. You're spending it on analysis, spending it on tailoring what you need, your output and productivity increases, and your overall bill quite often comes down. So I suppose that's the world of precision farming that Will is very much involved with in terms of the arable sector, and Matt certainly on the sheep.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, Dewi, is focus on your own farm as well. It's very easy listening to these sort of presentations and thinking that that'll go and then work on your system, because I think it is very, and I was very guilty of that when I was driving around with my Innosis hat on. And the other thing would be to actually test the product. Like, we're very guilty, I think, in the sheep industry of thinking, well, we need it, so we'll do everything. And then we don't really know whether it's worked, because it could have been the year, it could have been whatever. So don't be afraid of doing an element of a trial within some of your flock, just to be able to prove that it's actually having an impact, because we can quite easily add a lot of these sort of additional things into the system and just add cost, and we don't really know whether they're having a benefit or not.
Yeah. And just on that, chaps, in terms of one last question, I suppose, what's your view on advisors and using advisors in the industry? Do you use a lot of advisors, Will, or not?
I personally am very passionate about independent advice.
Mm-hmm.
So I do. That's why I do my agronomy myself, because that's as independent as you get. And then I put myself out there and learn. Like, I'm a member of AICC, which is the Association of Independent Crop Consultants, NIAB. Do stuff with the NFU. There's something. It's probably not so much in the sheep sector, but in the arable sector, if you're being advised by someone who's selling you the product, it's very difficult to gain their trust. That is an issue. There's a lot of big companies who sell a lot of agrochemicals, and they're advising you, and it doesn't really sit right with me. So advice is great, and especially if you're uncomfortable with something, always seek advice, but just make sure you're getting it from the right place, I think.
And Will, in terms of some of the various schemes that are coming out from governments, I'm assuming you navigate yourself through those as well, do you? Because it is a quagmire for a lot of farmers, especially of a certain demographic.
Yeah, and it's actually more complicated now than ever because our business is split up in three different ways because there's my brother and my dad. So that's good, but then it means we have, in theory, it means we should have 3 SFI applications, but actually it means we have, well, 6 or 7 plus a mid-tier, and then they all have different start dates, different end dates, and it can get a bit of a muddle, but you have different software and you try and manage it accordingly. But yeah, I sometimes I think time in the office is as valuable as any, and farmers can be guilty of doing a few things outside, and like just sometimes go in the office, sit in front of the computer, and actually work some things out. And it can be the most valuable time spent sometimes.
Yeah. And Matt, in terms of the key advisors you've used over the years, what works, what doesn't?
Yeah, and I'd be similar view to Will, really. That I'm very keen to ask people that know a lot more about things than me, because there's lots of them about. But it's been independent. We don't, rather than pay anything paid for. It's been the opportunities to network with with Innovis and meet different people in different scenarios, that I've got a very, like most people in our generation, I have my WhatsApp groups are ridiculous amounts, but the amount of knowledge in those WhatsApp groups is amazing. So it's accessing that rather than possibly bringing in outside advisors. I'm sure there are very good ones out there, aren't there? But that's just how it's worked for me.
Yeah, certainly. And some of you that are involved with Innovis currently, you will know that quite often we will signpost you to other farmers that are doing or operating certain system, because again, as Matt says, every system is different, but there's quite often some really useful take-home snippets, sometimes some key elements from some farms. So again, talking and having these sort of discussions and farm visits, and we will be trying to do quite a few more of those through the summer, where we're trying to get people visiting farms and actually seeing what goes on. And likewise, we are working with NSA to try and develop this NSA sheep graziers list. So NSA have a list which is derived from what Liz Genevieve did initially. And so that farmers can log on to them, NSA members currently, but we're also working with them to try and get Innovis customers on board with it, where you can go on to this sort of, if you like, a dating element where you can put yourselves up there if you're looking for these sorts of relationships with arable farms. And equally important, or more important, there's a free element there for the arable farmers to be able to go in there and to actually have yourselves listed up there. As we've realized many, many times before, this is all about understanding each other. It's a true partnership, as we all said, and cooperation and collaboration. So 9 out of 10 of those will never come to anything, because we know that's the case. But there is that one out there, that 10%, that really will. And you can find that sort of that match, that symbiosis that people like Matt and Will find. And I'm sure there's lots of opportunities there. In fact, we've got, for the first time ever, I think, an opportunity for youngsters to go into sheep farming. And as long as they've got a bit of nous about them and they've got a dog and a handling system, there is some opportunities out there, mainly on the east side of the country. But, if we can actually create a pathway like the dairy pathway that's happened in New Zealand, in sheep farming in the UK, it has to be something we work towards. Where we integrate, some people that love sheep and some people that tolerate sheep on their land, like Will. But it means that there is an opportunity there. So I think we will work with NSA and various others to try and develop that. And there is a comment. It's more of an observation from Fergal on the chat there, saying not a question, only an observation from using Matt's rams, both Aberglack and Aberfield. Super Vigor and lambing is in a sole outdoor system in the west of Ireland. So Virgil, thank you very much for giving us that quite positive message at the end there. And it's always really, really good to get our Irish customers on board. We know that it's quite a distance for you, and we've been struggling to get exports working now last year, and I'm not quite sure if this year is going to be much better with Blue. We may even look to actually develop a flock over with you if that's the case, because we can't be going on like this and not actually getting genetics over. And likewise, we know we have people like Thomas on the call from Sweden. So we are actively working towards trying to get genetics out into other countries, because if we haven't got Blueton or Schmallenberg, then we've got foot to mouth knocking on our door across the channel. So yeah, so we need to have these contingencies in place in terms of getting genetics to you all. But it's been super interesting, Will and Matt. You're both really, really good at what you do. That's obvious. You're also very humble in terms of what you're about. But it's really obvious to us that it's a great partnership, and you really are working towards the future. And if we have an industry that has individuals like yourselves in it, then I think UK ag is in a pretty good place. So we just need our politicians to get behind you, and we'll be away. So, and on that note, we're just nearing 9 o'clock. So thank you all for joining us. And we will leave it there for now. 2 weeks from tonight, I think it's 2 weeks from tonight, we will be talking carbon in terms of benchmarking, measuring, and all of the elements that you can be doing. So join us in a couple of weeks' time. But thank you all. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Again soon.